And before we get started, I just want to thank Mark and Rose Friedman, who have sponsored this year in memory of their parents, Jean and Eugene Gluck, and Rabbi Morris and Adelaide Friedman. It's especially special for me because Mark and Rose Friedman's granddaughter is my daughter's very, very close friend in school right now. And even though I tried to get my daughter, who's already finished with school, to come onto this Zoom, or minimally come sit next to me, that's already a stretch. And to get her friend to come, I seem to be unsuccessful because they're not on. But I did try. I thought that would be extra special. Rose and Mark have been involved with Ramaz and it's also special because of their connections to Great Neck, where this shir is being given from. So the shir is entitled The Halachic Problem with Naaseh V'nishma. Naaseh V'nishma, of course, are the two words that the Jewish people collectively stated when being offered the Torah, and they mean we will do the Torah, meaning there's a commitment to the Torah, V'nishma, and then we'll figure out what was written in the Torah. And of course, these two words are the subject of tremendous literature, and most significantly, they're at the bedrock of the obligation of a Jew in 2020 in Tafshin Pei for being obligated. This is the core of the obligation of a Jew sitting in Manhattan, in Great Neck, in Los Angeles, wherever they are. Why we're obligated in Torah and mitzvot. And we could spend a lot of time in talking about how it's indeed rational for someone to commit to something prior to learning what it is. And that, of course, is a shir which is worth giving based on the midrash that Hashem went around to the different nations asking them for would they want to accept the Torah, and they each asked what's written in it. Hashem gave them a response. Don't kill, don't steal, don't commit adultery. And each one said, no, we like doing those things. Until finally they went to the Jewish people, and the Jewish people said, Naaseh V'nishma. Because if the Almighty, who is omnibenevolent, who is all good, is offering you something, the only rational approach is Naaseh V'nishma. The only rational approach when the omniscient, omnibenevolent being is offering you the key to the world, the Torah, is to say, of course we want the Torah. And after you say you want the Torah, then of course you have to know what's written in it. So although we could spend a long time on that, I want to get to kind of a technical issue that could be brought up with Naaseh V'nishma, because it brings out two beautiful messages for us pre-Shavuot, pre-Shavuos, when we won't really be able to have Tikkun Leil Shavuos. So here, maybe you'll be able to share this with your families. So here we go. The Gemara in Shabbos, in the well-known Gemaras on Peichet, on Daf 88, the Gemara reads, Am Rabbi Elazar b'shah shekdimu Yisrael Naaseh V'nishma. At the time that the Jewish people said Naaseh, and then following that Nishma, Yatzita bat kol v'amra lahen, a heavenly voice came out and said to the Jewish people, Mi gila levanai razeh shamalach eshar b'shamshim bo. Who gave away the secret that only the angels know? The angels know that formula of Naaseh V'nishma. How did you guys figure that out? Said the heavenly voice to the Jewish people. Dichtiv, how did the Gemara know that the angels knew this formula? Baruchu Hashem malachav giborei koach, osei divaro. The malachim are osei divaro. Sorry, they do the words of God. Lishmoa b'kol divaro, followed by the words that they then hear, they listen to that which the Almighty said. Bereisha osei, initially the angels do, v'hadar lishmoa, and only afterwards do they listen to what is asked of them. So this is a major kind of praise that the Jewish people were given, that they were compared to the Malachim when they said Naaseh V'nishma. But how could Naaseh V'nishma actually work from a technical halachic perspective? And here I bring you to the Rambam in Hilchot Mechira, and the Rambam in the law of sales. The Rambam has a really interesting halacha. And it'll feel like I'm jumping, but I'll bring us back. The Rambam says in Perek Yud Aleph, Halacha Tet Zayin, Chiev atzmo b'davar she'eno katzuv. Imagine a person attempts to create an obligation for themselves that is undefined, that is unlimited. Kegon, for example, Shamar Hareini chayav lazunotcha o lechasod 5 shanim. I'm committing to supporting you for 5 years, or I'm committing myself to provide your furnishings or your clothing for 5 years. Whatever reason a person says that. That obligation does not take hold halachically. Because as the Rambam explains, even though you've given it a finite amount of time, 5 years, one doesn't know what the other person's needs are in terms of their lodging, in terms of their furnishings. Maybe they have very high standards. One doesn't know. Moreover, who knows what the market will do? Who knows what the market will be for furnishings or for clothing? So there's an undefined quality to that person's commitment, and therefore that commitment does not take hold, and that person is not obligated in that 5-year commitment. And so the Beis Halevi, the ancestor of Rav Soloveitchik, famously asks this question on Shavuot. He says, how can Naaseh V'nishma, which is what's pointed to as the technical halachic catalyst for our obligation, how can that work? Isn't it a case of someone obligating themselves in that which is undefined? Naaseh, do it, V'nishma, and then we'll figure out what it is. And indeed, in many cases, it's not defined. There are, in many cases, kind of like no limits to the mitzvah. One that comes to mind is kibbud av va'ein, which is often, given as the reason why we don't make a bracha before we do certain mitzvahs, because there's no limit to how much of that you can do, or the 6 mitzvot that you can do at any time, as the Mishnah Berurah famously says. So isn't the Torah itself an obligation which is eino katzuv, has no limits, and therefore should not be obligated even when one says that they're going to do that? And that's the famous question of the Beis Halevi, which I'd just like to provide the 2 answers for. This is kind of like class. I know some of you look like you may not have been in school in a while. I'm happy to be interrupted. I'm very used to it. Even on Zoom, I'm super used to being interrupted. I actually meant to start off with the fact that my greatest fear, especially when I'm presenting to adults in this new Zoom world, is that one of my 5 children will unexpectedly run into wherever I am and say something highly inappropriate. We have very few private spaces here. This is an open market. Once I'm muted, it's like, I don't know what's going to happen. So I don't take any responsibility for my children. Literally 0 in what they're going to say. So that's the big question of the Beis Halevi. Is it Naaseh V'nishma itself a case of an obligation which doesn't have a limit, and therefore one should not be obligated in? So the Beis Halevi, himself addresses the point, and he distinguishes between a person making an obligation, making a statement that says, I'm obligated to do X. I'm obligated to provide you with clothing. I'm obligated to support you for X amount of years. And a halacha that everyone knows, or many people know exists, which is obligating oneself to become a servant to someone else. We have bankruptcy nowadays, right? But like, it used to be there was no bankruptcy. So what happened if you were $1 million in debt? You said to the person, okay, I'm yours. Tell me what to do. That's how I'll work off my debt. And that's called shibud haguf. And the halacha is that adam yachol limkor atzmo le'eved. A person can literally sell themselves to become a servant. It means that you can pay off your debts by telling another, I'm at your disposal. Whatever you tell me to do, okay, I'm going to do. And that way they can work off their debts. And that's a thing, as the kids would say these days. That's a real thing. That's a halacha. And the Beis Halevi wants to distinguish between why is it that someone can sell themselves as a servant, obligate themselves into servitude, which seems to be davar she'eno katzuv, that which is unlimited, undefined. and make the statement that I'll commit to supporting you for X amount of years. What's the distinction? And the distinction is exactly that. The distinction is that no rational person would get into a financial obligation which they don't know the end of. So when I say that I am going to support you, you want a definition of that. You want a contract that defines those terms. But there do exist dramatic terms, dramatic circumstances where a person is not talking about what they, as a part of their existence, commits to, but rather the circumstance is so dramatic that they themselves give over, so to speak, ownership, rights of themselves, because there's no alternative. And that is, we have now legal systems, at least in America, right, or Western civilization, to deal with those circumstances. But in ancient civilizations, that was shibud haguf, and that exists. We don't really have that nowadays. There's no such parallel. But you could imagine in that kind of fiscal world that's your only alternative, and therefore you can give yourself over. Now, even that doesn't have such a unlimited or undefined quality, because we know that a Jewish servant owner has many halachot that they have to abide by. But from the perspective of the servant, it is undefined, because you don't know if he's going to ask you to plow the field instead of his ox, or if you're going to paint the house, or if you're going to wash the dishes. You don't know what he's going to ask you to do. But it's still a halacha that you can get yourself into, called shibud haguf. And the Beis Halevi says that's the obligation of Naaseh V'nishma. It's not the fact that a Jew says, part of my life I am committing to the Almighty, right? I commit to paying your living expenses. That's a part of my existence that I'm committing to. And that would what we call hitzchayvut. And that wouldn't work if it's undefined, because no rational person would do that. But in the most dramatic circumstances, it is rational to have shibud haguf, to give over your entire existence. And the Beis Halevi says that's what a Jew's relationship halachically is to Hashem. That we don't have an independent existence outside of the Almighty. We have a shibud haguf, we have ourselves given over to Hashem, because our existence is dependent completely upon Him. And whatever Hashem is asking of us, especially given that it's defined as good, it technically halachically works no different than the Eved who in his dramatic circumstance gives over his existence, if you will, to his master. And that's the Beis Halevi's resolution of this initial quandary. What's interesting is that this distinction might also explain a machloket in the Gemara, which talks about Kiddush Hashem, the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. Does a Jew have to give their life for certain mitzvot? And we, of course, know that there are certain mitzvot, 3 in particular, that a Jew has to give their life and not transgress those. And that's the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, sanctifying the name of Hashem. There's a machloket in the Gemara of whether a non-Jew has that mitzvah. Meaning, we know that a non-Jew has Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach, 7 categories really of mitzvot that apply to them. Is Kiddush Hashem one of those? And the Gemara concludes in Sanhedrin that a non-Jew, a ben Noach, does not have to give their life for any of those mitzvot, any of the 7. It's not included. It's not part of their deal, if you will. Even though the non-Jew has a meaningful spiritual relationship with Hashem through the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, it's categorically different than that of the Jew, because the Jew has an obligation under certain times to give their life. And perhaps that distinction between Jew and non-Jew in their relationship to Hashem, each of them spiritual, each of them connected, but the difference in the relationship perhaps is this distinction of the Beis Halevi, which is that perhaps the Jew has the relationship that our entire existence is defined by our relationship with Hashem, shibud haguf. Whereas the ben Noach, their existence is not necessarily defined by their relationship with Hashem, but rather it's a part of their existence and their identity. And therefore, if it's only a part, then their entire existence never needs to be compromised if it comes in conflict with their relationship with Hashem. Whereas a Jew, at some point, if your entire existence is defined by your relationship with Hashem, there has to be a point where that decision has to be able to go either way, because our entire existence is synced with Hashem. So that's one approach to the problem. The other approach is the Sephardic approach, the Chida. The Chida is an approach which begins with the fact that the Ma'amad Har Sinai experience, when we said Naaseh V'nishma, that is really the paradigm. Well, before we get to the paradigm, that is really the initial marriage in Judaism, because the Mechilta explains that that was the moment that Hashem married the Jewish people. And therefore it became the paradigm for all future weddings. So for example, we know the Gemara, which says that God, so to speak, held the mountain over them like a barrel. That's one of the reasons we have a chuppah, that there's something on top of us. It mimics the Sinaitic experience of being under something and feeling that responsibility, and being that the experience of receiving the Torah was essentially a marriage of the Jewish people to Hashem. We can look at the problem from a different lens. Essentially, the Chida points to the very next halacha that we had looked at, that we had initially seen the problem through, the challenge through. And the very next halacha presents perhaps a resolution. The very next halacha in Hilchot Mechira says, "Umipnei ma haposek im ishto she'azanet bita chayav lezona." Let's say you have a case, second marriage, and one of the parties, in this case the party of the woman, is bringing in a child. So there's an obligation, or potentially an obligation, where there's a condition in the marriage that the new husband would have to support the child. And that works. That obligation works. Yet the previous halacha just said that if you get into a situation, a financial agreement, which is eino katsuv, which is undefined, it doesn't work. This is exactly the same case. You have a child who you are now committing to support, not your child, different child, and yet it works. You don't know what those child's needs are. You don't know how they'll develop. Maybe they'll need special schooling. 1,000 variables that we don't know, especially adults, on the Zoom here, what life brings. It's definitely a case of eino katsuv, an undefined obligation that one's committing themselves to. So why does that take hold? Why does the obligation take hold if the previous halacha just said that it shouldn't take hold? And the Nosei Kelim, the commentaries on the Rambam, Mishnah Melech, and others point to the fact that when it comes to certain relationships, or you could broaden it to certain contracts, relationships that have contractual pieces to them, the relationship is so primary that even if there's something that's kind of irrational embedded in that contract that is part of the relationship, a person's willing to forego that. When a husband and a wife marry, the commitment of that relationship is so great that either party is willing to say, yeah, there are pieces that we don't know what's going to happen in that relationship, but we're committing to, because that's what it means to be husband and wife. And that's rational. In a normal business relationship, I'm going to what? I'm going to commit to pay you, something undefined? Irrational. No lawyer would ever advise a client to sign such a contract. But when it comes, sorry to sound sappy here, I predicted it. When it comes to love, if you will, when it comes to love, comes to marriage. So yeah, the pieces that we've committed to, so as married people, that are undefined, and that is accepted in halacha. And if you take that if you take that to now back to our problem. So if it's true that Naaseh V'nishma is the marriage of the Jewish people to Hashem, so then it makes sense that when you're getting married, when you're establishing this relationship of absolute love between two parties, there are going to be things that even if technically no person would commit to, But of course, we're marrying the Almighty. Of course, we're going to commit to some things that we may not yet know, because that's what people who are in love do. What's interesting is that this chida plays itself out in some of the minhagim of the Edot Mizrach. They call the Shabbos before Shavuot the Shabbat Kala. Interesting, I never knew that. Because Shavuos is the wedding, and before Shabbat Kala. And the 5 days that we know after Shavuot, where we don't say Tachanun, often because of Tashlumin, that's when the Korbanot were potentially brought, the post-Shavuot Korbanot, and that's why I don't say Tachanun, because they're days of joy. The Chidah, not the Chidah, I'm sorry, Rabbi Slomnicki says that it's Sheva Brachos. It's the 7 days of Sheva Brachos, 2 days of Shavuot, and the 5 days in Chutz La'aretz after, because that's representative of the marriage of the Jewish people. So again, going back to the question, how could it be that Naaseh V'nishma creates the obligation being that it's seemingly a davar she'eno katsuv, it's an unlimited, undefined commitment. There's an exception to that rule when it comes to nisuin, when it comes to marriage. All marriages in some ways have elements of that undefined piece. And being that Shavuot is the marriage of the Jewish people, Naaseh V'nishma, so we were able to say that as it was our wedding day. So my general rule in Zoom is I break my hour lessons up into 20-minute bits. I think I hit the nail on the head here. I think that's about people's attention spans on Zoom. It's my sense. I'm happy to hang around if anyone has any questions, anything they want to talk about. Really, thank you for joining and for making my Erev Shavuot more meaningful than it would have been otherwise. Thank you.